This week's Torah portion, Parshat Pinchas, contains one of the most quietly revolutionary moments in the entire Torah, innocuously framed as a legal appeal brought by 5 women, the daughters of Zelophehad. Their father died with no sons, and under the existing law, their family's land, Zelophehad's inheritance and legacy, will be lost. These women step forward with courage. They approach Moses and the entire assembly and say, "Why should our father's name be lost from his clan just because he had no sons? Give us a portion too." But Moses cannot answer them because it is not his decision to make. It is divine law. So he brings their case before God, and God responds, "The plea of Zelophehad's daughters is just. You shall give them an inheritance." Now, since to our modern ears this change feels right and just, we might miss what a radical, even scandalous response this is, with God essentially saying, "Oops, you're right, ladies. That doesn't seem fair at all. My mistake. I am going to change divine law." I guess the Torah wasn't exactly set in stone. I will admit I hadn't really taken in the implications of this story until this year when the clergy team had the privilege of studying with Professor Chris Hayes, the retired Sterling Professor of Religious Studies at Yale. She explained that the daughters of Zelophehad's story is one of only 4 instances in the entire Torah when God changes the law in response to human pushback. But the fact that divine law can change at all was actually completely countercultural to the prevailing idea of divine law in the Greco-Roman tradition. According to the Stoics and Greco-Roman philosophy, divine law was absolute truth with a capital T, like the laws of gravity, or 2 + 2 = 4. Divine laws were rational, universal, and eternal. Now, because law is divine according to them, it cannot change, just as the laws of physics do not change. They are immutable. By this standard, what God does by changing divine law is heresy, even for God. Repealing divine law is like repealing gravity. But Jewish law, halakha as we call it, does not derive its authority from divine reason, but from divine will, the will of our Creator, who has engaged us in a covenantal relationship. So true, of our 10 commandments, some of them are the most rational, universal, moral laws that exist in the world, including do not murder, do not bear false witness, do not steal. But the first of the 10 commandments is simply a statement: I am God. Now that's not a commandment exactly. It is setting up who is the commander, which is especially important when you do not understand the rational reason you should be doing a law. It's akin to when a parent commands a rule to a child and they think it's irrational and they ask why, and the answer is simply, because I am the mom. Now, the will of God in Jewish law is not always comprehensible to us. For example, the prohibition in the Torah of not being able to mix wool and linen, shatnez, let's face it, it doesn't make logical sense. And it's not universal. It is only for Jews. In Judaism, the orienting principle of divine law is not logic or reason or even ethics. It is holiness. God's laws are designed to make Israel holy, kadosh, which in Hebrew literally means set apart. In many ways, ironically, it's the more irrational and particular laws that actually set us apart. Everyone knows that all human beings should not murder or lie, but not eating pork chops, now that's different. What could be more kadosh, more set apart from the prevailing Greco-Roman understanding of divine law than a God who listens and sometimes even changes God's mind? When Jews of the rabbinic period encountered Greco-Roman philosophy, this tension between Torah law and reason created a deep anxiety. And the Jews responded in several different ways. Some Jews created apologetics for it. Philo was the poster child of this approach. And they tried to fit the Torah into the Greek categories. They argued something like kashrut. It might seem irrational, but it isn't, they said. Instead, kashrut teaches us the 4 highest Greek values of self-control, courage, justice, even wisdom. I'll admit that that's kind of the approach I take when I explain why I decided to keep kosher. I say it's a discipline and it's more ethical for the animals, or it makes me more mindful when I eat. I like to come up with the rational reasons for why I'm keeping those rules. Now, a second response to this tension came from Paul in the rabbinic period. Paul saw Mosaic law as too particular, too temporal, too obsessed with ritualistic adherence. He could not reconcile Mosaic law with the Hellenistic understanding of divine law, so he just abandoned it. He created his own new little offshoot, now known as Christianity. The third response was the rabbinic one. The rabbis do not try to make the Torah and divine law conform to the Greek ideals. They were not scandalized that the Torah didn't align with a singular truth. In fact, they rejoiced in it. The rabbis rejected the idea that law had to be rational, unchangeable, or that there was an absolute truth. The Talmud recounts, for example, a 3-year-long argument between the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai, until finally a heavenly voice proclaims, Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chaim. These and these are the words of the living God. 2 irreconcilable truths, both the word of the living God. They say there are shivim panim laTorah. There are 70 faces of Torah. And sometimes getting it right isn't the point. Now, this is not about moral relativism. It is a requirement of moral discernment. Because the rabbis understood something quite profound, that in matters of human behavior, there is not always a single truth that can apply in every situation. Mathematics, they can have truths, but when it comes to morality, they were skeptical of absolutism. Moral questions rarely fit into the neat dichotomy of true or false, good or evil. Often what is good or right actually depends on context, time, and the people affected. A law that was just in one generation might become unjust in another. A rule that protected the community in the past might now harm it. The daughters of Zelophehad prove this. The law, God's law, was not good enough for them. Now, instead of being punished for pushing back against God, they are praised. Their moral insight becomes the new law. This is not about a weakness in divine law. This is about the strength of God's belief in us. Because God, if you can believe it, relies on the moral insight of human beings to help refine the law. This responsibility is what makes Jews different and distinct. So to absolutize any one value or even one truth is not just flawed. Our tradition would see it as a form of idolatry in itself. We have seen the danger of those who claim certainty, sometimes in the name of God. In Judaism, God's greatest success is not when humans obey without question, but when we become God's moral partners and even, at times, God's critics. So what if the Torah wasn't given to offer immutable truth, but to invite us into a lifelong engagement with truth-seeking? What if the laws weren't there to be obeyed mindlessly, but to engage our minds in questions of justice and goodness and morality? I have to imagine that when the daughters of Zelophehad made their case, God smiled, like a parent whose child ends up becoming their teacher, which can be very maddening and annoying sometimes, but you also can't help but feel proud. When those 5 daughters make their case, God appreciates this holy chutzpah and knows that this is what sets us apart, what makes us truly holy.